Think back to when you were in high school. No, not recess, not your friends, not sports, the academics. Now, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being terribly boring to 10 being much better than even playing around, how would you rate your academic experience in high school? Now imagine that you heard that you, your child, all children, whether rich or poor, living in Alabama or Zululand, could have an education that would not only score a 10, but improve reading, writing, thinking, mathematical reasoning, citizenship, connoisseurship, everything, dramatically more than does standard education. Of course, that sounds like hype, but by the time you finish watching this little video, I'm hoping you're going to come to believe that that is possible and, in fact, is a goal that we should fight for. I call them SuperCourses. Think back to that high school course that's considered a gateway to success and that many students struggle with, Algebra 1. And think back to how Algebra 1 was taught to you. For too many students, the memory is of boring or poorly understood lectures on quadratic equations and calculating the area under the curve of a parabola. Instruction never got more immersive than a train left Cleveland for Chicago at 4 p.m. at 20 miles an hour, and another train left Chicago for Cleveland at 3 p.m. at 30 miles an hour. At what time will they meet? If you're like many students, not only couldn't you figure it out, you couldn't care when they met. Worse, whether you were bold enough to ask the teacher or not, weren't there times you at least thought, why do I need to learn this? Now imagine this super course version of Algebra 1. On your tablet, laptop, or even your phone, you see an image of yourself tied to the front of a train. The video starts, and in the distance, you see another train approaching. You need to figure out whether you have enough time to untie yourself. Isn't that more motivating than the standard lesson? Now imagine that instead of a random teacher, you got online a scintillating one who entertainingly and tantalizingly offered you clues to how to figure out how much time you have. Now picture the algebra course filled with such activities. Picture also that the course is gamified, so your performance on each activity earns points and contributes to your getting ever higher level badges. Of course, your performance, automatically recorded, provides, without having to take days off for standardized testing, it provides ongoing assessment, not only to track your achievement level, but to give the teacher feedback so she can give you better support, either live or by adjusting the online course's approach, for example, faster or slower paced, more verbal or more visual. You might ask, but that's an online teacher. What about the human touch? My response is to ask you, wouldn't you rather have such a transformational teacher online than the random teacher live? And of course, the course wouldn't be without human beings. A live teacher would be on site to answer questions and otherwise provide support. And many of the simulations and other activities would be done in student teams. SuperCourses would bring other advantages. For example, to serve America's ever more diverse student population, a course could be translated into many languages. While it's important for all students to learn English, newcomers from non-English speaking countries probably should be taught that difficult algebra course in their native tongue. Would the SuperCourse approach also work for other high school academic subjects? Well, let's take English. Imagine you're in a video and Gone with the Wind's Rhett Butler says to you, "Frankly, dear, I don't give a damn." And then your online teacher asks you, what would you say back to him? Imagine an English course filled with literature's great passages in which you are the protagonist at key moments. Wouldn't you learn more about literature, about persuasion, about life's universals, as well as have a good time in such a class rather than if a stuffy teacher was lecturing at you all year long? Now let's consider science. Instead of having to memorize the chemicals in the Krebs cycle, balance acid-base equations, and calculate the force needed to move a 300-pound weight 4 inches on a surface with a friction coefficient of 1.2, you're, for example, in a competition with your classmates. On your screen, you're experimenting with different rocket designs and fuels, lots of science and math involved in that, to see which group can create the rocket that flies the furthest. And there's no risk of blowing anyone up or anything up. Or in a history course, instead of the usual fact-larded march through the ages, imagine your faces on that screen during history's greatest decision points. For example, you're President Truman, just having been told the pros and cons of dropping a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. What would you do? And after you've opined, your dazzling instructor would lay out pros and cons and ask you to decide again. That's why I believe that SuperCourses promise an education likely to yield far better learning and greater pleasure than the so-called innovations that schools implement, such as smaller class size, cleaning graffiti from school walls, high expectations, and longer school day. Why don't we already have SuperCourses? Well, part of it is our fault. We've been too conservative. We and our ancestors were taught by a sage on the stage plus worksheets, and we feel we turned out okay. It's difficult to accept we might not have, or not optimally, so we figure we've got bigger battles to fight than to try to reinvent the education system. But if there's a way to help our kids learn more while having a more pleasant experience for all those years in school, shouldn't that be high priority? That would seem to be especially true since, despite the US spending number one per capita in the world on education, America flounders near the bottom of the OECD's 34 countries. Another reason SuperCourses haven't been implemented is the teachers union. Teachers pay dues to the union to protect their jobs. So unions fight innovations such as SuperCourses in case at some point somebody will argue, who needs the live teacher anymore? But to allay the union boss's fear, should we deprive our children of an education far more beneficial and pleasurable than what we had, and especially than what many at-risk kids have, not just in the US, but in developing nations? Another reason we haven't developed it so far is that it'll take a lot of work to create SuperCourses. Of course, that takes a lot of effort, and that is something I believe the federal government should take on. Fund it once, and the cost gets amortized across millions of students. And there's no need to fund it all at once. In fact, it's prudent to first develop just one course, maybe that bugaboo algebra course, and pilot test it against the conventionally taught algebra course as delivered by a random sample of live teachers. Only if the super course is found superior in learning and student satisfaction would it make sense to develop super courses in additional subjects. Now, depending on your motivation or your position, there's a little or a lot you can do to make super courses a reality. For example, might you send it to your kid's principal to see if she might tout it to higher-ups? Might you mention it during the public comments section of a school board meeting? Might you send a copy of this little lecture that I'm giving you to your school district superintendent, to the state superintendent, or even tweet it, I couldn't find his email address, to Joseph South, the Education Technology Director for the U.S. Department of Education. SuperCourses, I believe, have the potential to do more to enhance the learning and well-being of all students than any education reform to date. Or at least, wouldn't it be nice if kids could learn algebra in more interesting ways than a train left Cleveland at 4 o'clock? Thanks for watching. I'm Marty Nemko.